Hi Cam, how are you?
Morning, sweetheart. Very good, thank you.
That's good. So thank you so much for talking with me today. I thought it's really timely. There's a lot of cash pressures out there. We hear so much people go, I need money, I can't get money, and you and I know that's just not true. So would you like to sort of tell us what you do, what Strive does, and we can start from there, please?
Yeah, for sure. We do some business and investment lending, all secured via a mortgage on a property. So where we set ourselves apart a little bit, there's a lot of cash flow lenders in the market these days, where they're looking at people's banking, what they're bringing in each month, and then making a lending decision on that. We've been around since 2006, but we're completely different to that. So we're looking at an equity position in a property as the security for the loan. So instead of looking at the cash flows as the security for the loan, we're looking at a property. One of the great benefits that has allowed us over the last little period is that people typically have a fair bit of equity in their properties at the moment. Anyone that's owned a property in Australia in the last sort of 5 years, it's almost doubled. So that's allowing businesses to be able to access that equity, whether it be via a second mortgage, without having to jump through all the hoops going through a bank to try and get business lending. We don't need to look at financials or tax returns or BAS statements. It's just allowing a really simple, straightforward, quick process for people to be able to access equity in their property for their business to get them from point A to point B.
We see a lot of businesses, a lot of people come to me with tax debt. It's not necessarily because their business is bad. Often it's because their business has grown very quickly, or someone hasn't paid on time, or a debt has gone broke and hasn't paid them at all, and they need a bit of a stopgap. So they need time from us to stop the ATO hassling them, but they also need a bit of extra money. And I think I would be very rich if I had a dollar for every time someone said, I've been to see my bank and I've got a tax debt and they won't lend to me. How does tax debt affect your consideration if you're looking at lending to someone?
Again, we do no financials, no credit checks. We're looking at the security position. So unless the ATO had a caveat against the property or something, we wouldn't know. And it doesn't affect us because we understand that people need to get from point A to point B to get on with their business. Whether that's fixing up tax debt or whether it's paying wages because they haven't been paid by a supplier, whatever that might be, we can help out there. And again, it sets us apart from the banks where we don't need to look at all that other stuff. We understand things happen to people that they don't foresee, and we can help them fix that through the equity that they have available in their property, which the bank also wants, but then they obviously also want A, B, C, D, and E to go along with that.
I think a perfect example is when they're waiting for someone to pay them. So if they had a big job, often even government jobs sit at 90, 120-day invoices. And so they're waiting for that big job to pay them, but they might have their next BAS due, or they need to pay a payment plan for 3 to 6 months. And I think the reason these conversations are so important is there's a whole heap of different solutions. So someone might say, oh, well, I can't afford a payment plan with the ATO because I can't pay that monthly amount for the next 6 months. And a bank's not going to just lend me the 6 months until that invoice gets paid, or until someone pays me, or until I get that next contract. But those sorts of things are exactly where you can come in. Like you said, it's that real point A to B. Sometimes it's a stopgap. There's a whole heap of different reasons people need money, and quickly. And your turnaround time is super quick.
Yeah, 100%. We can legitimately turn money around within 24 to 48 hours. From the two-page application form, we only require a rates notice and a home loan statement. From there, we can have a decision made within an hour. What sets us apart from some other lenders, we have all our own in-house legal. So we have our own law firm as well. We're a small family-run company. My little sister's the in-house lawyer. So we do all our own loan documents, all our own PEXA settlements. It's all our own money. So we can legitimately have someone money within 24 to 48 hours, which can get them back into their business rather than worrying about stuff that isn't going to make them money and spending time on stuff that isn't making their business any money. And highly successful businesses quite often just come up with these cash flow gaps that they need to fill. We very rarely deal with businesses that are no good, because if they don't have clear exit strategies of how they're going to pay the money back, and they don't have equity in their property, then we're not going to be able to help them either. So we're dealing with people that just have this stopgap that they just need to fill.
Often people think if a business has tax debt that it's a bad business or it's not viable. But as we know, there's so many reasons why people have tax debt, why it sort of comes out of the blue. It's not a bad business. And there's also a bit of a misnomer around that if you have tax debt and you put it in a payment plan, you're then considered a compliant business. The ATO completely leave you alone. The ATO don't chase you for that money once you're in a payment plan. And so sometimes we'll hear people say, I've got a BAS, I can't afford to pay this BAS because of A, B, and C, and that will default the payment plan, which is where you could come in. Or we might say to people, we need 3 to 6 months of a payment plan paid so we can have a look at the interest component and reduce the overall debt. And sometimes it's even that first 3 to 6 months that they don't necessarily have before we can reduce the debt.
Yeah, 100%. And by definition, tax debt means you've made profit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
This is what I don't know. People say, oh, I've got tax debt, it must be a bad business. Well, a bad business would have no tax debt because it made no money. We look at it completely differently, that tax debt to us isn't a bad thing. Things happen to people.
Can you give us an example of an industry or someone that you've recently lent money to that had such a quick turnaround that really changed whether or not the business was going to keep going or whether it was going to struggle?
We've just recently done one where a guy works in the mines and he needed to buy some equipment. It was a water truck. We were able to do that whilst he organised the refinance of his house. So typically people have got the equity to be able to go to the bank and get the money, but there's just a timing issue that's going to take, he didn't have 6 weeks to wait. Or there's a problem with a tax debt that the bank's not going to lend to them until the tax debt is dealt with. We can deal with the tax debt for them, which then allows them back into the bank to do the refinance. We've done a fair bit of tax debt stuff lately that has just allowed people to be able to move on. So people will have substantial equity in their property, and they've been also able to get that interest refunded. And we all know now that the interest isn't a deduction anymore for your business, where the interest that you're paying to Strive will be a tax deduction. It's a company loan, so any costs in interest are then deductible through your business. We do stuff where we can settle houses for people. Maybe the bank is not going to be able to do it in time, so we've been able to save deposits. If someone's paid a deposit on a house of $200,000 and they're going to lose that because it doesn't settle on time, we're able to help out there.
And even after that debt's been paid out, so the ATO are charging just over 10.95% interest compounded daily on a debt. But after you've paid out that debt, if there's grounds, we can still come back and do an application to get rid of that interest. So often people don't realise that once the debt's gone, they can still recover the interest that they've paid over the period of that debt if there's the right grounds to do that. So that's sort of another tool that a lot of businesses can use once you've come in and paid off that debt to absolutely help increase cash flow, help pay that debt back as well. It's a bit like an insurance policy. People talk about the cost of doing business and the cost of borrowing and the cost, even we get asked all the time, the cost for us to put people into a payment plan. And I say that cost is a bit like insurance. It's protection. Without being in a payment plan and when you have outstanding debt, the ATO can do credit reporting. We're seeing a huge amount of garnishee notices being issued when you're not in a payment plan, which means that the ATO can take money out of your bank account without you knowing, which can have huge impact. So a lot of this is around the cost of doing business. I'm assuming that's something that comes up. It often comes up with private lenders, that your rates are very different to if I walked into ANZ today. But I see that as it's a cost of doing business and the protection that it gives.
Yeah, they are to some degree, but it is actually getting cheaper and cheaper just with the amount of people that are now in the market. So you're going to be looking at somewhere around 20% per annum. But again, if you're only doing it for 6 months, where you're talking about 10%. So it's not really that much more expensive than what the ATO is already charging you. And as I say, the key to our stuff is getting people back into their business earning money, because every night that you're sitting around trying to or stressing about this or trying to sort this out, or you're on the phone to the ATO yourself trying to do it all day, you're not actually productive within your business. And when you're not productive within your business, you're not actually making any money, and you're going backwards at a rate of knot. Where if you can just clean it all up, you can actually move on with life and get back to doing what you do best, which is, if it's a plumber, you need to be out servicing properties. If it's a developer, you need to be doing the next development. If you're a builder, you need to be on site making sure you guys are working and you're finishing stuff on time. So it's really about solving a problem for someone that allows them to get back in and then get back doing what they do best.
There was, I think, a philosophy a few years ago, and the older generation in some respects, that the ATO was a cheap, easy small business bank, and that's just not the case anymore. When you actually look at what it costs you, you look at the risks of having outstanding debt, and the ATO, I think, have brought a whole heap of recovery measures into place to really change that mindset, that they're not there as a cheap, easy small business bank. You can't just use debt like you were talking about an overdraft. You can't just leave debt sitting with the ATO as an overdraft. If you're not in a payment plan, you're not paying it back. And I think that's sort of why we're seeing some of these legal changes or legislative changes around the interest not being deductible anymore, to really change that mindset that you need to pay the debt back. You've got to be in a payment plan. You can't ignore it. You can't worry about it later. I often talk about eating the frog. It really is the case that you have to face it head on, because the consequences of not dealing with it are huge. But the reason we have these chats is because there is help there. Just because you have the tax debt, and just because the ATO have said no, we were actually doing a presentation together the other day, and we were talking about, I hear all the time people ringing me saying that they've already tried to get a payment plan with the ATO, and the ATO said no to them. Just because the ATO has said no to an individual with a payment plan, when you're using a specialist, we can still get a yes. And you would be exactly the same. Just because you've walked into your bank and asked your bank manager, can I please have some money? They say no. It doesn't mean you're going to say no either.
Yeah, 100%. And it's a bit like using a specialist in finance, right? Whether you're using a finance broker that has different options for you, or yourself as an expert knowing how to get, or how the ATO is going to work, what's going to work, what's not going to work. When you're trying to do it yourself, it makes it very, very difficult. I just think that COVID actually caused everyone to say, "Oh, I don't need to pay my GST. I don't need to pay my tax. I don't need to pay this. I don't." And it's trying to get people's attitudes out of that now, right? It's like, okay, well, like in 2019, you had to pay your tax and you had to pay your GST. Just because in 2020 to 2022 they put all these measures out there that you didn't, it's like telling your kids they don't have to do their chores for a month on school holidays, and then going back to school in a month and saying, okay, everyone back in routine. You're like, nah, well, I didn't have to do it.
That's 100%. And then there was a drop dead date. So people just collected debt, more and more and more debt. And then there was a drop dead date. Okay, you've got to pay it all back now, right now. So yeah, couldn't agree more.
Thanks so very much for having me along. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to help some clients move through the situation that they're in. And many people find themselves in this situation. So being able to help them get from point A to point B, get rid of that stress out of their life, get the ATO off their back, and get them back into their business doing what they do best, no matter what industry they're in. And I'm sure Strive and Tax Assured can work hand in hand with helping achieve those outcomes for your clients.
Thank you so much for chatting with us today, Cam. I think the takeaway tips are, the world's not going to end if you've got tax debt. You can borrow, there's solutions, money can come quickly. Tax debt is not the handbrake. And even if you've heard a no from the ATO, or you've heard a no from the bank, or you've heard a no from the broker, there's absolutely solutions available where both of us, and whether we're working together or working side by side to help clients, that they can keep their business running.